doing stuff actively is a lot more effective, right? If you're doing it yourself. In fact, I think we've all had the experience. You go through a tutorial and you're following along and you're understanding, but you're just reading, you're consuming it. And then you go to your project and you have no idea how to apply those things because you haven't done any of that.
Hello, welcome to devtools-fm. This is a podcast about developer tools and the people who make them. I'm Andrew, and this is my co-host, Justin.
Hey, everyone. We're really excited to have Josh Comeau on with us today. Josh, you
Hello.
are a legend. I don't know. I love all the stuff that you do, so this is really special. I was just saying before we started the recording, your site is an immaculate work of art. It's brilliant, and your educational content is fantastic too. So we're incredibly thrilled to have you on.
Well, goodness, you're making me blush here. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Before we start talking, or before we dive into our questions, would you like to tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a software developer. I live in Montreal, Canada. I started tinkering back in like 2007, 2008. I really got my start a few years later when I got my first dev job in like 2014. I've done a whole bunch of stuff for a whole bunch of companies, but really what I find myself really gravitating towards is building whimsical interfaces, really like trying to find the best way to create a given UI or to solve a problem. And these days, I spend my time creating online interactive courses. So that's what I've been doing for the past few years. I blog at joshwcomeau.com, and I create, I have courses on CSS and React right now.
Cool. So you have an extensive blog. I read a few posts preparing for this interview. And one that stuck with me for a while, since I'm also a web developer and I love to focus on the front end, was the period of 6 months where you weren't able to use your arms like you usually would to use your computer. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience and like how it changed how you view interfaces and what you do?
Yeah. So it was interesting. I injured myself somewhat ironically in physiotherapy. So I was there for some other issue and I pulled a nerve doing the exercise. And to make a very long story short, for about 6 or 7 months, I couldn't really type without my elbows really bothering me. So I tried like a whole bunch of things, right? All the ergonomics. But what I eventually settled on as a way for me to keep working was to not use a keyboard at all. In fact, to not use my hands at all. And the way that worked was I had a microphone for dictation and an eye tracker, so a little camera that would see where I was looking as my mouse. And so you learn really quickly just how how inaccessible so much of the internet is, and how we take for granted the fact that like your little fingers can just go and it can go so much faster than you can using other methods. So like I did spend quite a few months learning the skill of how to dictate, and it's surprisingly sophisticated. Like the way that it works is you create a bunch of little functions for yourself. So short words will sort of expand into larger snippets. So it's very customized to what you do. You know, I was using styled components at the time, so I created a whole bunch of little styled component helpers. And with that, you can get pretty good. You can sort of get back to like something approaching what your speed is with a keyboard. But you never quite catch it. And so it was definitely an eye-opening experience in a few ways. One thing that I took from that was starting to think of my output, right? My ability to code as a currency. So the way that I had thought about it, and the way I think most of us think about it, is that we have this infinite time horizon ahead of us. And, you know, the characters are free. Like typing is totally free. Whereas this experience sort of made me shift and imagine that I have this pool of key presses in my life. And every time I press a keyboard, that number goes down by one, right? It's a limited amount of key presses. So that was actually what inspired me to leave my job and start creating courses, which is that it was this fun thing that I thought I would enjoy doing, that I thought I would be good at. But it was something for the future because I had this infinite time horizon ahead of me. And so I realized, no, actually, I shouldn't assume that I'll be able to do this later. I should do it now. And I alluded to this a little bit too. It really sort of opened my eyes to how inaccessible a lot of the internet is. The mouse replacement was surprisingly helpful because that it really makes it possible to click on things. But before I found that, like trying to navigate by saying the word tab and to go through websites like that, it doesn't work. And so these days I really try to make sure that everything I build is keyboard accessible. And in fact, in a lot of things that I build, I add little Easter eggs that are only accessible by keyboard. So I figure that way, I'm sure keyboard users are used to having a limited subset of what everyone else has. I like the idea that actually you can do more if you use the keyboard on my products.
It must have sounded wild when you were using your computer and just spitting out all of these like custom functions that did things, speaking your own little language.
Yeah, no, it's totally incomprehensible. And actually, one of the problems is that I'm not used to like speaking for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. So the throat survival became a real challenge.
I wonder, when was this, around 2017-ish? I can't remember exactly.
I think it was 2020. So it was during COVID,
okay.
During that whole thing.
Gotcha. I wonder, and it's crazy just to think about like, okay, well, COVID was almost 5 years ago now, which is crazy to think about. But technology has obviously rapidly advanced. We have LLMs now. I went to a talk at the last Strange Loop, and there was this guy there who had demonstrated this tool he was building called Cursorless, which is like puts little dots above words in code in your editor or whatever to make like voice navigation a lot faster. I wonder like if you redid this experience today, if it would like be different or better or I don't know, weirder, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there is. So I think people are probably familiar with GitHub Copilot. Many years ago, before Copilot had even sort of reached around 2021, 2022, maybe, there was a team at GitHub working on Copilot Voice, which was very similar to Copilot, but with a voice interface. And it was sort of specifically for this use case of people who can't use a keyboard and mouse. Or at least that was how it was like, because I got a little demo and that's how they pitched it to me. And it's interesting because it does sort of feel a lot more natural now where you don't write the code or you don't dictate, it's declarative, right? You sort of say what you want the code to do and the tool figures out the implementation for you. It's something that I feel like it was too far removed from what I had wanted to do. These days, maybe I would be more because, I've started using the composer tools and Cursor and things like that. So maybe now it would be more palatable. And I think that actually is a really exciting use case for AI is to if we can get the same output in less input, that's like a pretty trivial thing for most people, but a really significant thing for others.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'd like to stop and thank our sponsor for this week, but we don't have one. So if you'd like to sponsor DevTools-fm, head over to devtools-fm/sponsor to apply. And if you want to find another way to support the podcast, head over to shop.devtools.fm, where you can buy some merch and rep the podcast. With that, though, let's get back to the episode.
Maybe before we dive in and talk about sort of your courses and what you're doing about education, can you tell us a little bit like more in depth about your story of like becoming a course creator? So you just alluded there, it's like just realizing there's like a limited amount of key presses that you could do is like really motivated you to leave your job. But like, what is that overall story? Because it's like creating is one thing, teaching is another thing, and they have some synergies, but it's two different, very like distinct skills. So I'm curious about your journey of like how you got there.
Yeah, so there were a bunch of sort of pieces that came together. One was that in 2017, I started working for a company called Khan Academy, and they were based in Mountain View, and I'm here in Canada. So I rented an office at WeWork, and at that WeWork, there was a code bootcamp. And so, you meet people at the co-working space. And so eventually I would go to their demo days because it's always so cool to see what people build. And I started teaching there, sort of working part-time, and did that for quite a few years. Eventually, I became one of the lead instructors and developed their React curriculum. And initially, I had thought of that almost as like a little hack for me to get better, because there's nothing more humbling than working with people that are brand new to it. And they ask a question like, what's the difference between a statement and an expression in JavaScript? And you open your mouth to answer and realize you have no idea. Like you have sort of a broad, you've worked with it enough that you can use these things, but to actually put into words, like, what are they? It's very good at helping you find your own blind spots, right? The things that you've just never learned and have worked around your own holes in your knowledge. So that was really my motivation. Was I thought it would be a really good way, or really, I don't know if this was my original motivation, but it's why I kept doing it, because I discovered that it was a great way for me to get better myself. But in that process, I realized that it was really quite a lot of fun. Like I enjoyed the process of helping people understand things. I learned a lot about what does and does not work, right? A lot of my explanations initially, you could tell when you're with someone in person, if it's going over their head, it's very obvious. So that was sort of my initial experience with that. But I had also seen what fellow Canadian Wes Boss and many other people have been doing with their own course businesses. And I had been blogging since 2014, so I had my blog running for a long time as well and enjoyed doing that. So I feel like somewhat haphazardly, I had been assembling the pieces that I would need. And in 2020, when I had that whole experience, it struck me that no, I should do this now. And it is, I get a lot of emails from people who also want to create courses. And it's counterintuitive, but people often start with the course, which is like step 7. Like there's a bunch of stuff you have to do before you make the course. Otherwise, if you make the course, you'll release it into the world and nobody will really know about it. Like you need those sort of earlier steps, right? You need to have some sort of either a blog or a YouTube channel or a TikTok or something that allows you to demonstrate to the world that you know what you're talking about and help people so that you build that sort of relationship. You need some experience teaching too. That's really important because you could be the most knowledgeable developer, but if you've never actually taught it to anybody and you try to create a self-coursed product, you're going to learn pretty quickly that things aren't as clear as you thought they were when you tried to explain them. So there is a lot of these pieces that I think people miss, that they're really important foundational precursor steps.
Yeah, so you take a lot of steps to like kind of demonstrate that expertise. Like if you go to like almost any page on your website, there's a very detailed breakdown and an interactive example to kind of like help teach and push the lesson along. So what inspired that more interactive, creative type of learning experience that you go with in most of your lessons?
Yeah, it's a great question. I saw a talk from Brett Victor called Stop Drawing Dead Fish many, many years ago. And the theme to his talk is that if you have a pen and paper and you draw a fish, right? You draw that little fish shape that everyone's familiar with. That's like a pretty good fish. That's a pretty good fish for the medium of pen and paper. But if you take that same fish and you make a video of it, and the video is 10 seconds long, and it's just the camera zoomed in on that drawing of a fish, that's not a fish. That's a dead fish, because a fish moves, right? It swims around. And similarly, if you build a web application or a game or an interactive medium, and the only thing your fish does is swim around and it doesn't respond to cursor input, then it's not actually a fish, right? It's not a true representation of a fish for the medium that you're in. So I saw this talk and thought it was really cool and really interesting. And it occurred to me that blogs fit on this spectrum, right? A blog is not a book. It's not a video. It's something that you can have words and videos within it, but it's so much more than that, right? You have this opportunity to allow someone to experiment with ideas and try things out. You can have embedded code playgrounds and demos where you have little sliders where you can really show the person in a much more like effective way than words would do, or even pictures or videos. You can have this 10-second experience where someone drags a slider and it immediately clicks because they're the one sort of interacting with this thing and testing their own mental model and seeing how it holds up. It just struck me that it's such a better way to learn most things. And so when I first created my blog, like I started blogging on Medium, when I set out to create my own blog, which I think was in 2018 or 2019, this was sort of a must-have for me, is the ability to do whatever I would do in software development, like whatever sort of freedom or flexibility you have building websites, I wanted to have that when I write blog posts. If I had this idea for an embedded thing, I wanted to be able to do it, right? Not just be limited to the handful of HTML elements you have with Markdown.
I love that talk. First off, Brett Victor has some real bangers in his early talks, and that one's fantastic. And I think your work really speaks for itself. It really does shine. And it's interesting to think about like how people learn and what helps things stick. So you sort of explore this. How do you sort of communicate this information in the medium that is appropriate and sort of leverage all the tools you have? But then I think it's also interesting, there's like this metacognitive piece to your work where you write a little bit about learning itself, how to learn, which I think is also really cool. And I just like wanted to ask kind of how does that influence how you think about teaching? I'm a little scattered, but if we go back earlier to, you're giving the example of like someone asking about like an expression in JavaScript. It's like, oh, what is an expression? And that makes me think of like people say the best way to teach or the best way to learn is to teach. Because you fully have to understand it. And there's this like meta level there. It's like, well, if you want to be a really good teacher, then you kind of really need to understand how people learn. And I don't know. So I'm curious how all that like shapes how you think about teaching.
Yeah. So when I worked for the local coding boot camp, they gave us a book about how to teach software development effectively. In fact, I read a few books on the subject because I really wanted to like figure out what I was doing. And the takeaway that I took was that there's sort of like two different modes you can have when learning, right? There's the active mode and the passive mode. Passive mode would be like you're watching a video, you're listening to a talk, you're reading a blog post, whereas active mode is like you getting your hands dirty, like you're experimenting with things, you're building stuff. And as I think all of us have an intuition for, doing stuff actively is a lot more effective, right? If you're doing it yourself, in fact, I think we've all had the experience, they call this tutorial hell, of like you go through a tutorial and you're following along and you're understanding, but you're just reading, you're consuming it. And then you go to your project and you have no idea how to apply those things because you haven't done any of that. The problem, though, with active learning is that it's really hard. Like it takes energy and we're sort of naturally lazy. So if if you build a course where you're throwing someone in and it's all just exercises and challenges, it's going to be pretty exhausting and people aren't going to enjoy it. So when I was at a boot camp, we had a little bit more flexibility with this because people had paid $10,000, $12,000. They're probably not going to like stop showing up if you challenge them. So when I was building the React curriculum for them, we really did focus more on making it effective rather than making it pleasant. Like we figured it would be pleasant once you learned it, even if it was really frustrating during the day. But as like someone writing blog posts or creating my own courses, you have to find a better spot on that spectrum, right? Like, so my courses now, I try to have a pretty equal mix where like we'll have some casual videos and some like kind of easy things to get you started. And then I'll throw an exercise at you. And I also think it's really important to mix things up. Like similar to my blog, which has, embedded videos and exercises, or not so much exercises, but, little playgrounds that let you try things. I try for my course to never have too much of the same medium for too long. So if one lesson is written, the next lesson will be a video. The one after that will be like a little mini game or something that sort of throws you off from what you're doing. And all of this is sort of in service of keeping the person going and trying to find the right balance because, people can only spend so long reading article after article. But if you mix it up a little bit, if you try to vary the format, it makes it easier to stay engaged for longer. So yeah, it's definitely like I hadn't necessarily realized when I started this journey that there was so much strategy to it. Like, you think just make a nice video, make a nice blog post and people will read it. But yeah, it's I'm glad you asked about it because it is this interesting subject that I don't get to nerd out about very often.
So next, let's dive into some of the content that you've produced. I think the first big course that you came out with was CSS for JavaScript developers. So what inspired you to write that course? And maybe like what was one of the harder examples that you spent a lot of time like perfecting on in the course?
So I wanted to make that course because I had worked, from maybe like 2016 or so, I mostly worked in front end, mostly worked with JavaScript frameworks, like first with Backbone, if anyone remembers Backbone. A little bit of Ember, a little bit of Angular, and then React, where I've spent quite a few years now. And I knew so many people who would probably describe themselves as JavaScript developers, right? Front-end developers who really lean into like the back of the front end, as they say, like the more the framework stuff rather than the UI stuff. And so many people in this category have a pretty good level of understanding with JavaScript, a pretty good level of understanding of HTML, and then there's CSS, which is like their Achilles heel, right? It's the thing that always ruins their afternoon because it behaves unpredictably. And it's not surprising to me. Like I was in this boat myself where I never learned CSS. Like very few people, when I taught at the boot camp, you have this 12-week program. 11 of the 12 weeks are JavaScript. And that week 1 is a whole bunch of different things. You have maybe an afternoon of CSS. And when I was trying to figure out what I wanted my first course to be, because I had like 5 or 6 different things I could cover, it occurred to me that CSS was the thing where I thought with a pretty small chunk of time, like 10, 15, 20, 30 hours, I could really get someone from like a pretty beginner level to pretty competent. I mean, CSS does take a very long time to get like expert level. It is a very deep language, but it's so many people are struggle with it so much and have such like a lack of understanding because they've never spent the time, that I thought in a pretty small amount of time I could really help solve a lot of these problems. In terms of like what was the most challenging part, something I wish I had realized when I was starting the course was, and I kind of figured this out from chatting with people and from trying a couple of different structures. A lot of people approach CSS from the properties. Like you think, okay, I'm going to learn what the color property does and what the display property does and what the background color property does. And if I can just learn all the properties, I'll know the language. When really, I think a better way to look at it is that CSS is this constellation of mini languages, and they're called layout modes. I prefer to think of them as layout algorithms. I think that makes more sense for JavaScript-minded people. That you have Flexbox, right? That's its own little world within CSS. And you have Grid. You have Flow Layout, which we don't normally name, but that's the default if you're not using one of these other ones. There's Positioned Layout. There's all these different things, all these different systems. And the CSS that we write, so like when I write width 100 pixels, that property is going to be passed in as an input to this layout mode. And that layout mode decides what to do with it. Like Flexbox treats width differently than Flow Layout does. And this core part of how CSS works is responsible for so much of the misunderstanding, because like I think we've all had the experience of like you have your little go-to snippet, right? The snippet you've used over and over again. It's worked for you the past 99 times. You use it today and you get something different. Like the UI does not look like what you expect it to look like. And this is what makes CSS feel really sort of unpredictable. But it almost all, or not all, it often has to do with this discrepancy between what we think we're doing, which is passing it a bunch of properties, and what's actually happening, which is the language is figuring out which of these layout modes to use, feeding those properties through as inputs, like as arguments to that function, and using that to decide what the UI should be. And so this is sort of how I've structured the course, but it took me a while to figure out that like, oh, this is actually the core idea that the course should be built around rather than a thing that we sort of visit here and there.
Yeah, CSS is the one subject where I feel like I am an expert, but there's other people I can look to in the field and go, oh, there's much, much more for me to learn. And I think where my expertise is in those layout modes. But as you said, there's like such breadth and like creativity you can have in that breadth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's I've had the pleasure of speaking at conferences like CSS Day. And when I go there, I realize that like, oh, I don't actually know anything. Because, you know, I'll be chatting with people like Miriam Suzanne, who came up with a specification for container queries and all that stuff. Rachel Andrew is another person that, you know, they understand things so much deeper than I ever could. So it's the rabbit hole goes deep. Like there's many layers of understanding. And, you know, I've been chugging along now for quite a while. I think I understand it pretty well, but there's always more to learn.
I think some of the reputation that CSS has is from kind of how it used to be to interact with. You know, there were a lot of limitations, and CSS has evolved a lot, especially over the last several years. I mean, because previously, you know, just to do things like if we go way back when people were doing table layouts, is like making a rounded corner was an ordeal, right? We are definitely not in those days anymore. So it sort of begs the question of the recent developments in CSS. What feature has been your favorite?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I do like, as a very quick aside, I think part of why CSS is set up the way that it is and why we have this whole system of a bunch of languages within CSS, it's because we started in one place and it's been 25, 30 years since then. And we can't remove anything because if we were to remove things, we would break websites that were built in 1999. So we have to keep bolting new things on. And that's what sort of gives it the sense that it's this enormous thing with 45 ways to do anything. But that's how it has to be because, you know, it's important to have backwards compatibility. Favorite new CSS feature would have to either be container queries, which took me a while to like really get the hang of using them. But now I find that they're totally indispensable. And the has pseudo class, so :has, which honestly, as someone who mostly works with JavaScript frameworks, initially I had thought that it wasn't really that relevant for me because, you know, I don't write a lot of complex selectors. I sort of, you know, I rely mainly on, I have a class that applies to this element. I have a component that has a collection of classes. So I didn't imagine myself writing these selectors where you have like some high level thing with has and then some low level thing or some much more deeply nested thing. But what I found is it's incredible for matching other states. So if you want let's say you have a form, right? That form has a couple of inputs in it. if you want to apply styling to the form, if one of the inputs is invalid, you can do that, right? You can say form has input : invalid. Or if you want to have something on the form when the user hovers on one of the inputs, right? There's all these interesting relationships that you can do it with JavaScript, but it feels so nice to be able to do that with CSS now. So that's definitely been the most surprising in terms of new features I didn't really think would offer that much to me, but have, again, become a totally... I can't imagine going back to not having it now that I've gotten used to it.
Yeah, those two features in particular were like my wish list features forever, because I always found that like, oh, I need a little bit of has, or media queries don't just cut it. Every post by Nicole Sullivan on the Chrome dev team, she'd be like, what features do you want? Every time I was container queries. And now they're doing masonry layout. It's kind of amazing the things that we're getting in modern CSS right now.
Totally.
So when you're creating your websites, you like to have so many different fun little details and flourishes throughout. I think that's where it shines. Like you scroll and a little 3D Josh pops in from the side and asks you to subscribe. So what's your approach to building delightful experiences, and like what are like some like go-to flourishes that you have? Like you mentioned that you like to add little extra things for keyboard users. Is there anything else?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, and it's so hard to answer because every sort of project is unique. Anytime I'm trying to come up with something, it really is dependent on whatever it is that I'm building. But I think an important ingredient is novelty, right? I think we've all seen the confetti. You sign up for a new service and you get a burst of confetti, and it's always like the same confetti. Like it's the same. Like someone went to NPM and found the first confetti package, and that's sort of confetti is a wonderful thing. But if it's the same confetti that I've seen 100 times before, it gets a little stale. So a lot of it is trying to come up with like, what can I do that's like a little bit different, a little bit unexpected, because that's what makes it so nice. On my course platform, and actually I'm going to be launching a landing page for my third course pretty soon, which actually is going to be on all this stuff. So I'm making a course on whimsical animation, which is it's already so much fun to get to work on this stuff. But the like celebration in that landing page and in my course platform is fireworks, because you don't really see fireworks on the web very often. And with 2D Canvas, it's not too much trouble to set it up. So that's really the sort of strategy, is to come up with a way to do something that's unexpected and surprising. The little guy that you mentioned, right? My goal was to increase newsletter subscriptions because not a lot of people were joining my newsletter. And the way people typically do that is with a pop-up, like you're scrolling and all of a sudden this dialogue is in your face, right? You can't look past it. And everyone hates those. I didn't want to do that. But I thought, like, what if I asked permission to show one of those by having a little guy sidle out from the side of the screen? And it's very polarizing. Like I'd say 8 out of 10 people say that it's like delightful and it made them smile. And then I get the occasional person who's like, it scared the heck out of them, like ruined their afternoon. So it's a little bit like that's surprisingly controversial. But as long as most of the feedback I get is positive, I consider that a win.
Yeah, I think there are like aspects of this goes back to like choosing the right display for the medium. There's like a lot of aspects of the web that we just don't use. Like your website is one of the few that I know of that uses like sound effects for like menus opening and stuff, right? And almost any product design, if you have a physical product, there's like all this haptic feedback. It's like, an iPhone, you're tapping and you get like little clicks and you get little vibrations, and like it gives you that experience of typing. But so much of the web does feel that like a dead fish, like it's not really built for purpose or like really taking advantage of the platform. And it is kind of delightful to see how you've expressed that. And I'm excited for your course too. I think that is something we need a lot more of, whimsy on the web.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because it does strike me that, humans have 5 senses. A typical mobile app will use 3 of them. Like you have obviously visuals and then sound, as you mentioned, and the haptic feedback. There's a tactile element. On the web, we have 1 of them, right? We are 1/3 as sensory activated or sensory activation. So it does strike me that there is, and granted, like I always get pushback with this because people say like, I don't want my bank website to be making noises, right? There's certain utilitarian use cases that you don't really want a bunch of extra sugar thrown on top of it. And that's totally valid. But, I think there's lots of mobile apps do a really good job of this, of trying to find tasteful ways to integrate some of those things. It doesn't have to always be super over the top. And I agree that it's, people have preferences around sound, but people also have volume buttons. So it's totally within the user's control. If you don't want to have sound, you don't have to have it. But it'd be a nice thing to take advantage of that more. And that is something actually I've really gone over the top on the landing page for my new course. Everything makes sound on it. So I think you'll enjoy that.
Yeah, we need to go back. We need to go back to the MySpace days where every song has or every page has a song. I for one don't want the web smell API. I think we can skip that one.
Maybe that's a sense we can avoid.
We can skip that one.
Then we'll really know if it's a dead fish. So your second course was about React, and you titled it "The Joy of React." So why is React joyful to you, and like maybe how did it change how you approach development?
Yeah, so I first started using React in 2015 or so. I think that was the first job that I had. I was working for a services group, and they were always trying new technologies to see what would work. And before that, I had been using Backbone and Angular and had found both of them very troublesome. Like, it felt to me like there was a lot of stuff you had to learn, and you weren't really learning JavaScript. You were learning Angular. You were learning Backbone. And I always felt like there was a little bit of tension there. When I started using React, there was new stuff to learn, especially like Flux was the typical pairing back then. And Flux was kind of similar, where it was a lot to get your mind around. But it just struck me that it was so much more straightforward than the other ways of building web applications. And over the years, I've really developed a fondness for this tool, where the more I get to understand it, the more quickly I can move with it. I've tried, granted, some of this is pretty surface, but I've tried a lot of modern frameworks as well, and some of them seem really, really cool. But like with Svelte, for example, even though I really enjoyed using it in the couple of projects I've used it for, it felt like it had a little bit of that magic box sort of component where, instead of using an if condition or a ternary operator, you have your little, I forget what they call them, but you have a little data attribute sort of thing that has, or like view, also you have view if or vif. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it always struck me that this is an extra layer of things I have to learn, where I know how to do this in JavaScript. I would like to do this in JavaScript. So at least for myself, React really sort of worked with the way that I like to work. And similar to the CSS course, like I did know a lot of people, not really the same people as the CSS course, but a lot of people who would try to learn this thing and sort of, especially when teaching at the bootcamp, like it really, because we would teach React and I would see how many people struggled to really get the pieces to click. So that was sort of the same thing, but I knew that I would want to create a React course at some point. I had actually started working on a Whimsy course back in 2022, whenever that was. But my Whimsy course will have React components. The whole thing won't be React, but I will have maybe a module or two on React. And it occurred to me that I should build the courses in the order that people should take them. So that was sort of almost by default what my second course wound up being. And it wound up being a course that I'm really happy with, and a course that I think more than my others is really focused on the practical elements of how to get started. It is, like, I'd say, a little bit more aimed towards intermediate devs, junior to intermediate. Although actually, I did a survey recently and was surprised how much experience people had. But that was sort of who I had in mind when I was building the course, is like a recent bootcamp grad, right? Someone maybe 6 months into their career, really struggling to understand this thing. And it's been a lot of fun to work with people and to see the effect that a course like that can have.
Just kind of tying this back. So we talked a little bit about CSS and the sort of like evolution of CSS. And even though there's been a lot of stuff that's been tacked on, it feels like over time, CSS has actually gotten a little bit easier. There's more to learn, but like accomplishing certain tasks is just easier. It's like you can center a div now. It's not a problem. It's like we're past that being a hard thing. Whereas like React was like really famous for being very stable, and it still is a very stable language. They don't like do a lot of breaking changes to the API, and it like has just been kind of steady for a while. But as they're gaining more features and they're thinking more about like integration to meta frameworks and like these larger product features that like companies end up needing more advanced technology for, things are just getting a little harder to learn. There are like more things to fit in your head. Server components is like a big thing. It's like, what that concept means and how it fits in with all the frameworks and everything. So I'm curious, like, what you think of the sort of like new features that have been released in React recently, and how that sort of shapes how you think about teaching React.
Yeah. So the timing actually worked out really well for me in that I had always planned on having the final module of my course be on full stack React, so using a meta framework. And it was as I was working on that the app router was released in beta. So the timing of that was really lucky. And it actually worked to my benefit that I'm so slow at making courses that I had planned on finishing it much earlier. But yeah, no, it's definitely a lot. And it is interesting. Like there's this State of React survey that happens every year. And every year I'm surprised by how few people are, something like a third of React developers have never used server-side rendering. Like, it's not small numbers, and most people are still using React as a SPA, like as a single page application. It's interesting where I don't think it's fully true that the React team is like, sacrificing client-side only React applications and all in on server-side full stack sort of setups. But that is undeniably an area of focus for them. And I think it sort of remains to be seen how much this will be adopted. Like, one of the nice things about React was that you could drop it in super easily. You could migrate your way to it. You could say this one route in my application, or this one widget in that route is going to be your back component, and we can expand outwards from that. With a lot of the full stack stuff, you need to have a whole stack. Like, you need a backend that's written in Node. You need to have services that are sort of hard to run on your own, right? Next.js can be run on a typical Node server, but it's usually run on specialized, with Netlify or Vercel. So there's definitely a lot more of a barrier there. And I think because of that, we haven't seen the same level of adoption as we've seen with like hooks, where, they've only been released 4 or 5 years ago, and yet 98% of React developers use them now. So it is interesting. I'm not fully sold, especially like server actions or actions more broadly is their latest thing. And over the summer, I rebuilt my blog using all the latest stuff. So it's using Next 14 and, it's React server components. And I tried using actions and found that I wasn't really, part of this might just be that like the old dog doesn't want to learn the new trick. Like, I know how to do this really well without it. But it didn't strike me as a big enough difference to overcome the inertia that, we've all gotten used to creating little API endpoints and firing off a fetch request to them. So it remains to be seen, I think. I think that it's absolutely true that there is a lot more to learn now. But you also don't need to learn it all. Like, you can totally keep using React as most people use it. I don't think that's going anywhere. So part of it is, I think, and this is a skill that I have yet to develop myself. So this is very much like do as I say, not as I do. But we don't have to jump on every new thing, right? It's fine to say, okay, that's cool, but I'm going to keep doing things the way I've been doing them. And I'll wait a few years and see where the momentum has gone. And if it really is something that everyone's getting or everyone's using, then I'll take the time to learn it. But you can totally just keep doing things the way we've been doing them.
Were there some features you were building for your blog when using App Router that you're like, wow, like server components here kind of just like shines and you kind of see all the value? Because there's a lot to it and a lot of different situations you can use it in.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that like just from a mental model perspective, like it's really cool that now I can have some components that exist just almost like as a template, right? They're not dynamic, they're not interactive. My layout component, I just want to be able to describe a bunch of markup and not have to pay the cost of bundling all that markup into my bundle, sending it to the client, waiting for it to hydrate, rerunning all that code on the client, even though it's going to be exactly the same because it never changes. It does sort of feel nice that like, hey, now we don't have to worry about this. Right now I can have some components that only run on the server the way that PHP works, right? But at the same time, you have this really nice integration where you don't have to learn an entirely separate language on the front end. It's all still React. So the mental model is a lovely thing and something that I really enjoyed using. I had honestly expected there to be more of a performance improvement because of that. And maybe it's just that I had very few server components. Like I have all the little sound effects and stuff mean that component has to be a client component. So I'm probably not representative, but my performance didn't really improve. In fact, it got a little bit worse, which comes down to how Next handles CSS. They changed that and it doesn't quite work as favorably for me with the tools that I use. Still good, but it hasn't really, I wouldn't say that there was anything about it that I found, and this is sort of why I say it's okay to keep doing things the way you've been doing them. In fact, I have two main projects that I work on now. I have my blog and my course platform. I migrated the blog because it was due for it. You know, I had built that blog a few years ago, and it was all JavaScript, and I wanted to move to TypeScript. And actually, it was like 10% TypeScript, and now it's like 95% TypeScript. But my course platform is still using the Pages router, still using the older way of doing things with Next.js. So it's still a full stack application, but it's not using the latest thing. And I don't really plan on changing that anytime soon. Like, as far as I know, the Pages router is not being deprecated. And it really doesn't strike me as bad. Like, I still think it's a really cool way to build applications. So maybe eventually, you know, again, if the community really makes clear that this is where we're all going to go, I'll jump on the bandwagon. But for now, I think for that application specifically, and for listeners more broadly, right? If you're in this situation too and wondering if you should migrate, give it a shot if you want, but don't feel any pressure like you have to, because I don't think you do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like a lot of these advancements, especially in like JavaScript frameworks, they hit on these relatively, I won't say niche, but they're like advanced performance features that, like, you know, teams that are shipping big products ultimately need. And, you know, if you have a small site, you could probably still benefit from these in some ways, but like usually if you have a small site, performance isn't like the first thing on your mind anyway, right? That's why, like you were saying, there's a lot of people just still doing single page apps, and, you know, a lot of them are just like, you know, struggling to push out features as fast as they, you know, need to just like maintain their business. So it's like the performance thing isn't like top of mind anyway. So definitely use what you're comfortable with. And, you know, it is, the old adage is like, make it work, make it right, make it fast. It's like in that order.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There is a trade-off with adopting a lot of this complexity.
Yeah, and I'd say, like, just very quickly, server-side rendering, right? It's this great thing because it means that you can do that initial pass on the server. It means that you don't have to have the user stare at a blank white screen while you wait for all that JavaScript to be downloaded and hydrated. That's really important if you're building an e-commerce site that relies on search engine traffic, right? If you're building the Walmart.com website, well, the problem is someone searching for air conditioners. They have a whole list of a bunch of different stores. They click on yours. If it's not loaded in half a second, it's so easy to hit the back button. Try Canadian Tire, right? I'm in Canada, so whatever. Target is probably a more relatable other option. Most of us aren't building that, right? Most of us aren't building sites where almost all of their traffic comes from search result pages. And if you're building a dashboard, like, does it really matter if the load takes 1.5 seconds or 1.8 seconds? Is that gonna have any business impact or user experience impact? I think that we're so focused on certain areas of performance, right? What is that initial load time? When for most of the applications that we build, there's so many other aspects of performance that are more important, like how snappy it feels to use, right? Is there any like layout shift that happen? Like if you click on something, avoiding all the spinners is a good example of the sort of usability thing that doesn't really show up in performance metrics. Perceived performance, right? Like just how does it feel to use rather than sitting with your stopwatch and measuring it. So I do think like it's and this is everything, right? We always get sort of drawn into what is easy to measure rather than what actually matters. So it all varies by your use case, but I would say that single page applications are totally workable for like 80%. Really, they're workable for 100%, but they're like roughly equivalent for 80% of applications. And in the 20%, there is actually a reason a noticeable benefit and a strong impulse to do it. But yeah, I think it's always important to think like, is this thing important for my project, or is it just important so that, like, you know, my Lighthouse score won't be embarrassing to me on social media? It's always good to ask yourself that.
Yep, it's easy to measure the wrong thing and then put a lot of weight into that wrong thing. It definitely happens a lot with performance. So let's, before we wrap up, let's talk about your new course a little bit. I like how you framed that you needed to do the other two before you did this one. And that makes a lot of sense. Like, you need to know CSS to do animations. You probably should know a little bit about React JavaScript before you do animations as well. So what do you plan to cover with the course?
Yeah. Well, this is just like, I feel like you all are being too nice to me, just giving me all these opportunities to talk about the cool stuff that I think I'm doing. Yeah, my new course is focused on specifically the little bits of polish and whimsy and interactions and animations that I really enjoy building. This, I think, was like the most obvious thing for me to build from the very beginning. But exactly as you say, I didn't want to create courses in like that had dependencies on things that I planned on covering anyway. Like I thought it made sense to build the courses in the order that people can take them. I hadn't necessarily factored in that it would take me like a year and a half per course, but that's the way it goes. But yeah, the course is going to focus on the way that I'm planning on structuring it now is having 6 or 7 modules where each module builds like a final effect. The fireworks that I mentioned are going to be one of those effects. We're going to look at doing SVG icon animations because that's really cool. We're going to look at particles. I'm thinking we might do something with view transitions. So like route change animations, because those are always, whenever I ask people what they want to learn, that always comes up. But really the goal with all of these things is going to be to focus on like the little building blocks, the little like things that you have to know in order to fully implement not just this effect, but effects like it. It's also the first course that I made that's going to have some design element, because I recognize that like for most people, we don't have like a motion, an interaction designer sitting beside us that can design all this stuff. So I also want it to be useful for people in that situation where like, let's talk about how we come up with these ideas and how we avoid sort of going over the top with them, having it be too much. So that's sort of the focus of the course is I want to be able to teach people how to build the sorts of things that I find really sort of like the most fun parts of my job, right? I like to tell people that when I worked at Khan Academy, I found out that there was designers working on a new confetti system, and I like bulldozed, like I pushed everyone out of the way metaphorically and was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. And it was like the most fun I had that job. Not necessarily the most impactful thing I did at that job, but just like so enjoyable, so fun. And it is, you know, it's companies do this stuff for a reason, right? There's a reason that Facebook has balloons and all sorts of little confetti effects. It is actually a worthwhile thing to know how to do. So I think it's a good, it's like, I feel almost like I'm being self-indulgent and like letting myself dive into this stuff, but I do think there's real value to it. And that's how I plan on spending the next year or so of my career building that course.
That's awesome. We're really looking forward to it. There's all these little tidbits that you do on your site, and I would love to learn how to do those. So before we wrap up, we usually ask a future-facing question. And because you're sort of in the world of developer education and you're thinking a lot about building these courses, and we've talked already about how like the times are changing. There are LLMs now. People are like coding differently. They're thinking about how they build products differently. And I'm curious for you, how do you see like developer education evolving in the coming years?
That's a great question. I do think like, so I mentioned I've been converting my blog to TypeScript. I am not a TypeScript expert. Like, you know, years and years ago, I used to use Flow. At Khan Academy, we used Flow. So I learned the basics of working with the type system then. You know, and I learned a bit of TypeScript at my next job, and I've been using it haphazardly in my blog. But this summer was really when I started, or summer 2024, last summer, was when I really decided that I was going to learn this thing. And I was actually like, it was remarkable to me how useful it was to have ChatGPT or Claude, that I could be like, hey, I have this situation. I don't know how to type it, right? I have this weird situation. Discriminated unions, I've heard people say, what is that? Like, can I use that here? And, you know, you have to sort of be very critical with the output you get because sometimes it's just complete nonsense. But as long as you have like, the analogy I like to use is like you're a member of the jury and like the ChatGPT is the lawyer trying to convince you of their client's guilt. And you really like, you know, you're not just going to accept what they tell you. You're going to like really think about like, okay, does this make sense? But if you use it that way, it really is wonderful. Like it's a great way to at least point you in the right direction, right? It may not give you the perfect answer, but it'll give you the terms you can then search for to find the answer. That said, there still, I think, will always be a case because, you know, it's very like call and response. It's very question and answer. If you have a low level tangible thing, like I have this specific problem I don't know how to do, it can help you solve that problem. It won't tell you like, you know, how to build an application or like what technologies you should be using. It's not so good for like providing a curriculum and narrowing down because there's a whole world of things you can learn. This is what I think was so beneficial of boot camps and even like online curriculums like the Odin Project, just narrowing down what people need to learn, right? Like people who are getting started have no idea what's important and what's not important, and ChatGPT sure as heck doesn't know. So I think there will always be a role for instructors in guiding someone through the high level stuff, right? And then they can rely on AI for the low level filling in the gaps or answering questions. So like personally as a course creator, I'm not really worried. Like I think I've like everything else, right? You see discussions on how like there will never need to be X again because now there is this tool. I don't quite think that's true. And actually, I think they can work really well together. Like as an instructor, it may be that I can leverage some of this in my course platform and not only like lighten my own load in terms of how many questions I have to answer, but provide better experience because they don't have to wait, the hours or days it might take me to see it and respond. So I think there is like my optimist view of this is that they'll actually sit really well together. And there's always going to be opportunities for people that know how to teach to keep doing that.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. And there was like one thing, I remember the first time I used ChatGPT is like, the thing that struck me is that, that old adage, like there are no stupid questions. Well, like there are people who really don't want to ask certain questions in context, like in a classroom, because they're afraid of feeling stupid. I mean, it's a real social thing. And like
right.
Asking questions to an LLM feels completely different. They don't get tired. You can ask them endless follow-up questions and like they're not going to judge you for it. It's like fine. And that was like a real like shift for me thinking about like, oh wait, so this is going to be an ungated like way for people to like ask questions. And I think the other interesting thing is because it's conversational, I hope that this gets people in the habit of asking better questions. They have all this practice asking questions to get the right sort of information. I'm hoping that like it helps people frame questions better over time, which again, hopefully will lead to just like improved learning. But I guess
that's so interesting. Like you're right, because, and this is like, I think anyone who's worked as a developer and haven't had any sort of like interfacing with end users, right? If you've worked like, at one of my jobs, we would do tech support. Like, so every developer would have like a support role or a support shift as part of their job. And you learn that like a lot of people don't really know how to like provide a bug report, right? Like that's not, even now, like I teach software developers. So often I'll get a submission that like website is broken. Like that'll be the support ticket. Like, okay, tell me a bit more, please. So it's interesting, yeah, because if you take that approach with a chatbot, you're not going to get very good output, right? Like it does sort of show you how to tailor your question. And maybe that will sort of translate to human communication as well. So that's really interesting. I think that like the thing that I do worry about is, like I mentioned, right? The way that I think is really advantageous to use these tools is to think really critically, right? I've been using Cursor more and I catch myself like, I know what I have to do, but it's a lot of typing and I'm too lazy. So I throw it in the chatbot and it spits out 120 lines. And I'm so tempted to be like, I'm sure it's fine. Just accept the changes. Don't even read it. And I worry people are like handing over the keys a little bit too much. And the problem with that, like that's great if it works 100% of the time, but it doesn't. And you're going to reach a point now where all of a sudden the tool doesn't work. And if you don't have that ability to analyze it, if you haven't been sort of analyzing it all along, you're going to find yourself in kind of a rough spot. But I think that maybe that problem solves itself. Like someone has a couple bad experiences like that. Maybe that is, maybe this is all, it'll be self-reinforcing in that way.
We'll see. Yeah, I don't know. I am worried about the inherent laziness of people.
Cool. Well, that wraps it up for our questions this week, Josh. Thanks for coming on. This was a very fun conversation going into all the things that you've produced, and all those things are so good. So thanks for coming on.
I appreciate it. It was my pleasure, and I really appreciate the invitation. It was great coming to chat with you both.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. Really enjoy your work. It's delightful. Keep doing delightful work. The world is better for it. And thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it. Bye, everyone.